Under the thick, oppressive silence of the pine barrens, the faintest of whispers could be heard in the wind. A soft, almost tender call, one that would crawl under your skin and make your heart race, even if you didn't understand the words. If you listened long enough, it was as if the forest itself was alive with voices. A small group of settlers, hoping for a fresh start, made their way into this dark and mysterious wilderness, unaware that the pines were already home to something far older and far more sinister than they could ever imagine. They named the village Glens Hollow, a humble settlement built on the edge of the dense woods, where the ground was fertile and the air fresh. The settlers, led by a man named Jethro Gray, arrived full of hope, their hearts eager for a new life in the untouched wilderness. It wasn't long before the village began to take root, with log cabins slowly sprouting up amidst the tall, looming pines. But as the months passed, something unsettling began to happen. At first it was small, a few chickens missing here and there, a goat or two that vanished overnight, their pens left empty, as though the animals had simply evaporated into the air. But the settlers, determined to make their new lives work, dismissed these occurrences as the work of wild animals or roaming predators. After all, the forest was vast and untamed, and it was easy to blame the shadows of the trees for what was happening in the dark. But then, the disappearances became personal. At first, it was Elias Carter, a grizzled trapper who hadn't been seen for days. His absence didn't seem strange at first. Elias often disappeared into the woods for days, sometimes weeks at a time. But when his rifle and pack were found abandoned near the old creek, panic began to spread like wildfire. And then, just days after Elias vanished, Martha Delacroix, a young widow, disappeared as well. There was no sign of a struggle, no footprints, nothing to explain her absence. Only the eerie quiet of the woods. Still, the villagers tried to reassure each other. It was only wild animals. Maybe wolves, maybe bears, things that lurked in the shadows of the forest. But even as these explanations were whispered, a deep unease began to settle over Glens Hollow. The woods, once a symbol of opportunity, now felt like something else entirely. A place where eyes watched from every shadow, and every rustle of leaves felt like a warning. William Ashford was one of the first to voice his concerns openly. A quiet, thoughtful man, William had always been skeptical of the tales that surrounded the Pine Barrens. But the more he heard about the disappearances, the more a sinking feeling twisted in his gut. He couldn't shake the feeling that something unnatural was behind these strange events. So one evening, when the sun began to dip low in the sky, casting long shadows across the village, he made a decision. He would venture deep into the woods, see if he could uncover what was really going on. His wife, Ruth, begged him not to go. The air around the village had become thick with an unspoken dread, and she knew in her heart that the forest was hiding something no man should try to uncover. But William, as determined as he was, kissed her softly on the cheek and promised to return before nightfall. He never came back. As the hours passed and the sun sank lower, Ruth grew more and more frantic. She knew deep in her bones that something had happened to her husband. The wind had picked up, howling through the trees, carrying with it strange sounds that she couldn't quite place. Desperate, she ran to the village elders, the wise ones who were said to know the history of the woods, the ones who held the secrets that the settlers could never understand. But when she arrived at their cabin, she found it empty. The elders had vanished, their homes left undisturbed, as though they had simply slipped away into the night. Panic surged through Ruth's chest as she stumbled out of the cabin and into the village square. Where had they gone? Where was everyone? She was alone. That was when the whispers began. At first, they were soft, just a faint rustling in the trees, like the wind itself was calling her name. But as she stood there, frozen in fear, the whispers grew louder, more urgent. Come join us." The voice was soft and beckoning, as though something was waiting just beyond the tree line. With trembling hands, Ruth clutched the hem of her dress, her breath coming in shallow gasps. She knew she should run, but the whispers, they were like a lure, pulling her closer to the woods, to whatever it was that had taken her husband, and now it seemed the entire village. The moon rose high in the sky, casting an eerie glow over Glens Hollow. Ruth, despite every instinct screaming at her to turn back, stepped forward, drawn into the woods like a moth to a flame. She followed the whispers which seemed to echo from the very trees themselves, calling her deeper and deeper into the forest. The further she went, the more suffocating the air became. The trees seemed to close in around her, the darkness pressing down like a heavy weight. And then, just as Ruth reached the heart of the woods, she disappeared, vanished without a trace. When the authorities arrived months later, they found nothing. No sign of the village, no trace of the settlers who had once lived there. Only empty homes, their doors swinging in the wind, and an unsettling silence that filled the air. And the whispers. The whispers were still there. The search parties who ventured into the Pine Barrens after the disappearance of Glens Hollow came back empty-handed, shaken and disturbed by what they encountered. They found nothing, no bodies, no blood, no signs of struggle. It was as though the entire village had simply dissolved into the earth, vanishing without a trace, leaving behind only the cold, oppressive silence of the forest. Yet there were stories, rumors that spread quickly among those who lived near the pines. They spoke of the whispers, the same whispers that Ruth Ashford had followed into the woods. Some claimed that on quiet nights, if the wind was right, you could hear faint calls coming from deep within the trees, soft voices that beckoned in the dead of night, calling to anyone brave or foolish enough to listen. One night, a hunter named Harlan Drake ventured into the Pine Barrens alone, armed with nothing but his rifle and a desperate need to find the truth behind the stories. Harlan had heard the whispers himself, late one evening while sitting by his campfire. The voices weren't loud, but they were clear enough to be unsettling. "Join us, Harlan. We're waiting for you." He told no one of the encounter, but he could not forget it. So a few days later, he set out alone, determined to discover what had happened to Glens Hollow and its inhabitants. As he entered the heart of the woods, the air thickened, and an unnatural fog began to creep along the forest floor. The familiar chirping of the night creatures fell eerily silent, replaced by an oppressive stillness that made Harlan's skin crawl. Every step seemed to echo in the quiet, his breath heavy and loud in his ears. He pushed forward, following the faint trail left by those who had searched before him. But the further he went, the more disoriented he became. The trees seemed to twist and contort, their shapes shifting in ways that made him question his own mind. The fog thickened, swallowing him whole, and the voices returned, soft at first, then louder, more insistent. "You are ours now, Harlan. You belong with us." Suddenly, something shifted in the darkness ahead. Harlan froze, his heart pounding in his chest. Figures moved in the fog. Human figures, but their movements were jerky, unnatural, like they were not fully in control of their bodies. He could barely make out their forms in the fog, but he knew at once that they were not alive, at least not in the way he understood. The figures were pale, their skin stretched tight over their bones, their eyes hollow and empty. They were the forgotten villagers of Glens Hollow, their forms twisted by whatever had taken them. "Join us, Harlan," they whispered, their voices a haunting chorus. "Join us and never leave." Terrified, Harlan turned to flee, but the ground beneath him shifted and he stumbled. The whispering grew louder, almost deafening. The figures were closing in, their feet barely touching the ground, gliding through the fog like wraiths. His heart pounded in his chest as he fought to break free. But the forest itself seemed to hold him in place, the trees reaching out like skeletal hands. Harlan fought with every ounce of strength he had, but the woods were not done with him. The whispers surrounded him, filling his mind with maddening thoughts. He could no longer distinguish between reality and nightmare. Every step he took felt like an eternity, and just as he thought he could break free, the ground beneath him gave way. He fell into the blackness, and the whispers consumed him. When search parties came looking for him the following day, they found nothing. Only a few twisted tree branches and a trail that led deep into the forest, disappearing into the fog. The only proof that Harlan had been there were the whispers, still echoing faintly on the wind. Months passed, and the stories of the lost village and its vanishing inhabitants became nothing more than a dark legend. One whispered around campfires and in hushed voices. The town near the Pine Barrens, once a lively place, grew quieter with each passing year. People moved away, unable to shake the fear that something unnatural still lingered in the woods.